But the one thing that I have been very pleased with, because I have been challenged on this, and some people will infer, well, you don't vote for this, the military spending. And I said, well, I don't think it's good for our country. I don't think it's good for our finances, and I don't think it's good for our defense. And then they say, well, that's being unpatriotic, and that's, not pro-American, and they want to challenge you on this. But you know, the one group that supports me the most happens to be the military. We just go ahead. We just had a survey of the funding for all the candidates where the top categories are that donated money. In my top 3 categories of direct donations from the certain groups, the top category for me is the U.S. Air Force. The second is the U.S. Army, and the third is the U.S. Navy. Which means that the people whose lives are on the line are looking at what I'm saying, and they'd like a more sensible approach to when we send young men and women overseas. In the last 10 years, we've added to our national debt with our militarism around the sea by over $4 trillion. It's unsustainable. Robert Gates, not exactly a close ally of exactly the positions I hold, said anybody's talking about starting another war under these conditions ought to have their head examined. Yet there are people in our country talking about more wars. Well, we don't need more wars. We need more defense, and I think we could defend our country much better. We worry so much more about the borders between Afghanistan and Pakistan than we do about the borders between the United States and Mexico. I think we ought to be dealing with that border. But we could save a lot of money there. I'd bring the troops home. I wouldn't put the military out of service. I'd have them spend their money here, reactivate some of our bases. That wouldn't be so bad. Even in '95, when we had this commission, Congress didn't assume the responsibility. We set up a commission. Tell us what we're supposed to do. So they said, okay, close down these smaller bases in our country. But they never said anything about building bases overseas. So we kept building bases overseas, and we closed the bases down here at home. So I think it's time to reverse that. Close the bases down overseas and bring them back home and reactivate some of these bases until we get this house in order and our budget under control. That's what I think we ought to be doing. But the cuts could be made there, but obviously that is not going to be enough. We have to cut elsewhere. So my suggestion I have in the program for cutting back in the first year, I'm proposing that we cut $1 trillion. Sounds like a lot, but our budget is way too big. And if you don't do it, it's going to get cut back because the government will stop functioning when the money stops functioning. But cutting $1 trillion is not that easy, even with my appetite for cutting. But I wanted to do it in the first year. I can cut the $1 trillion, but I can't balance the budget in 1 year because we need a little attrition. And what I've worked into the plan is not putting people out of work that works with the federal government, but don't rehire them as they leave the workforce. And we can do that in 3 years. But this is what is necessary. And we have to reassess ourselves. How many departments do we need? Should we have the departments that are really explicitly authored under the Constitution, or should we add 1 or 2 every year or 2? I think the biggest department is one that just started recently, and that's the Department of Homeland Security. Quite frankly, I don't feel more secure by them spending so much money and harassing me at the airport. So I don't think that's a solution. So I propose to cut, to start by cutting five departments. And also I would like to do something with the salaries of the people employed in the federal government. That I have proposed, if I am to be the president, I am going to take the median income of all Americans. You know what the median income for all Americans is? It's a bit of a pay cut for the president. It's $39,000 a year. But why should the politicians do so well? Where is the best city to live right now? The best. They don't have a housing bubble crisis in Washington, D.C. They have one in the West in the various cities that were encouraged to overbuild and all because of the easy credit and all the regulations. But in Washington, D.C., I think the median income in that Northern Virginia area is like $121,000. I think every government official ought to be on the median income as well, which would be down to $40,000 a year. If we do this, a lot of people, there will be quite a few people that will be unhappy. Because they think it will be the end of the world. But I tell you what, if you're interested in self-reliance and determination, you're not going to have to sacrifice. Because if I come and say that for you, I want young people, part of the program is allowing young people to opt out of Social Security, to get your taxes as low as possible, get rid of the income tax, protect your property rights, get the regulators out of your hair and out of your life and get them not regulating your property. I mean, that's not a sacrifice for the people who want to work and take care of themselves. It'll be a sacrifice for those who have been bailed out endlessly with your money. That's what we have. Those are the individuals that have to sacrifice. But what happened on the crisis? They got bailed out, and of course the people lost their jobs and they lost their houses. So the sacrifice went to the wrong people. The people who were benefiting, got the bailout. So there is a lot that we have to do, but we have to decide whether or not we're going to work our way out. These to me, this is only our two options. Work our way out, cut here, and be more productive, get jobs back again. Or we just keep doing what we're doing, and right now we're continuing to do exactly what we shouldn't be doing. To cause all the trouble. Ever since the 88 bust, we've been spending more, the debt is exploding. Are they regulating less? No, they're regulating more. Every time we get in a crisis, there's more regulation. Even when Enron failed, under the Republican administration, they gave us Sarbanes-Oxley. Of course, we complain a lot by Dodd-Frank. It was a monster of a bill and cost us a lot of money, and Obamacare. But it's been both parties that had. Prescription drug program was not a Democratic program. We need to get rid of those things. You know, I like the term opting out, and I think we should generalize that. And we talk about opting out of Obamacare. Of course, the better thing is to repeal Obamacare, but in order to get a correction, you should never be forced into it. But you shouldn't be forced into any government program. You should be able to opt out. And you say, well, we have to have the revenues. How are we going to run things? If you're not in it, you're not going to be a burden. But you need to have a little bit of help doing this. If you want to assume responsibility for your own health care, which I believe we should have the doctor-patient relationship returned. We shouldn't have the drug companies and insurance companies running things and being the lobbyists for every reform we have in Washington. But if you assume responsibility for yourself and you have control of the first dollar you spend and you deal with the doctors directly, you're going to be much better off than having the insurance companies set the rates and the fees, and inevitably there will be shortages and rationing, and we're already seeing that because of the government being involved. Some people are saying, well, how in the world are you going to do this? What's going to happen to Social Security? You know, I said I'd let the young people get out of it. Sure, it's going to cut back. But I look at Social Security as at least an attempt to have a contract with the people. I never voted to spend one penny of the Social Security money because I didn't vote for the appropriations bill. So I feel that there is an obligation to try to make that work, and we should save money and be able to make that solvent and take care of the people, whether it's medical care or Social Security, that we taught to be totally dependent on that from the government. If we don't do anything, the cost of living is going to go much faster than the benefits. But if we do the cutting, we can do this. We can provide those benefits, but it won't happen. It cannot happen if we're not willing to cut some of these other programs, some of these departments, as well as some of this military spending overseas. So this can be done, but what I fear is the opposite. We're going to continue to do this, and then it's going to be more difficult to rebuild. What if it gets out of control like it has throughout history? Inflation has brought down many a nation, and we're on a rapid pace to destroy the value of our money. And history has shown that it happens many, many times. In the last century, we had quite a few examples, and recently we have Zimbabwe, but we're not immune to that. So this is the reason that we have to be willing to cut the spending. All the other is just talk. If you don't cut spending, you cannot solve the problem of too much spending by more spending. If you're too far in debt and you're having problems and you go to a counselor and say, well, you know, I owe this $200,000 and I only have 10 credit cards, and what am I going to do? You say, well, what we're going to have to do is call up my friend. He'll give you another credit card. What you need to do is spend more money. They teach in Keynesian economics that the only reason we go in session is the consumer quits spending. Well, maybe there's a reason the consumer quits spending. Maybe they lost their job. Maybe they have too much debt. So that is not the solution. The solution for too much debt is not spending more money. The solution is getting rid of the debt. As an individual, that individual, if they want to work it off, they have to cut the spending, and they have to sell off some things. They have to work harder, or they have to go into bankruptcy. But getting rid of the debt is very important. One part of the debt that I have advocated getting rid of is we, the taxpayers, owe the Federal Reserve System $1.7 trillion. Well, where did they get the money? They created it out of thin air. So why should we be obligated to pay them back or pay interest on their money if we're going to try to phase out the Federal Reserve? But that is not a real debt, and yet we're paying interest on that continuously, and it is part of the debt. By getting rid of that part of the debt, it actually gives you a window of opportunity that you wouldn't have to raise the national debt limit for a year. And I would not increase the national debt again, but it would give you a little leeway to get control of this. Now, I'm not advocating getting rid of the Federal Reserve in one day or 1 week. Matter of fact, just like in medicine, I want you to compete against the system by getting out of the system. I like the idea of you competing in education. We can't, even though Department of Education is something I want to get rid of and cut the spending, but what we always have to protect is your right to opt out. In medicine, if we ever come to the day where private schooling and homeschooling becomes illegal, we're in big trouble. So it is with the monetary system. You don't have to close shop at the Federal Reserve. If you get worried, oh, that would be too radical. I agree, it would be. You wouldn't want to do that. But why don't we legalize the Constitution? The Constitution says only gold and silver can be legal tender. But if you go out and take old American silver dollars, they're legal tender. It's under the Constitution. It's never been repealed. If you decide that you're going to pay your workers in silver dollars, guess what? You can go to prison. Somebody else coined their own money and said, well, let's use this money, gold and silver, it's legal. They were charged with counterfeiting, and they were also charged with terrorism and arrested, and all their gold and silver confiscated. I just don't know why people should be so frightened about legalizing freedom. I mean, we ought to be able to handle that. It's a bit of a challenge, but that's what our country was all about, living in a free society and being responsible to ourselves.